As I was thinking about the story today, thought about a time back in my seminary experience. It was at the end of our second year of seminary, and John and Kevin and I decided that we would spend the day exploring parts of Massachusetts. Our seminary, Gordon Conroe, was north of Boston, and so we decided to spend that day, which is Memorial Day. We had the day off, and we would go out to Cape Cod. And so as we went south of Boston, we decided to hit one of those other hot spots on the way there, which was Plymouth Rock. Check that out. And then out in Provincetown and began to look at some of the history around that. Spent some time there eating and exploring the town. And on our way back, we decided that we would go south on Route 6 down to the coast because we wanted to get a view of Martha's Vineyard from the south part of Cape Cod. And so as we were traveling down and the roads kind of got a little bit smaller, and we began to see these just amazing houses that were part of the culture there on Cape Cod, and we were just looking at them, and each one seemed to be more magnificent and bigger, and signs that said "do not enter" and big fences, and we were tempted to kind of go up and peek through the fences. And then we realized that a sign said "this way to Hyannisport," and we heard there was some compound there, called the Kennedy Compound. And so we began to wondering, did we pass one of the entrances to, and if we'd snuck up and we could see just how the other side lives. And for a while there, these poor seminarians, sort of dreamed and wondered what it would be like to have all that wealth and success that went with those homes that were out there on Cape Cod. And so as we realize that we are finding ourselves at times in our lives where we get drawn in by that, by the wealth, by the glamour. I mean, every time it seems there's another event in England with the Queen, or then we had the marriage, and I remember watching that one morning with understanding that Prince William and Kate, and the next person to be on the throne, and all of a sudden Kate's pregnant, and everyone's wondering, and all these stories about what's going to happen, and they're changing the law, so if it's a girl that she doesn't have to wait till her brothers are kings first. And so in England, it's very clear as to how succession happens. Well, as you're reading through the story, it's not that much clarity in what happens in chapter 13. King David's getting old, and so who's going to be the next king? How's that going to all? Because there's several folks that could potentially be king, and all of a sudden, one of his sons, Adoniah, sees the opportunity. Dad's getting old and feeble. I'm going to step up and claim to be the next king. And so he begins to do that very day. Nathan, the prophet, finds out, and Nathan, who had to share bad news with David about his sin with Bathsheba, brings him some other bad news and says, hey, there's a new king in Israel, and his name is not Solomon. Nathan knew that David had chosen Solomon as the next heir, so quickly David jumps into action and gets Nathan and another king to anoint Solomon king. And so all of a sudden throughout the city, there's a great celebration. Long live King Solomon. Well, Adoniah is having his own little party someplace in town with his buddies, and all of a sudden hears this noise, and all of a sudden realizing that there's a new king in town, and I'm in big trouble. So quickly we get a glimpse of King Solomon, how he's going to rule. And so he brings Adoniah into him and clearly lays it out and says, hey, if you show yourself to be worthy, not a hair on your head will fall to the ground, but if evil is found in you, you will die. So he gave this person who usurped the throne an opportunity to do what was right. And throughout this place, we've seen that David has done a really good job as king. Things are financially stable. There's no $1 trillion debt that he's passing on to the next king. There's no enemies in the Middle East that Solomon has to worry about his popularity going down because of wars. No, all is at peace. It's a good time to be king. Well, early in his reign, we find this passage that we just heard read about understanding the choice that God gave Solomon. I came to him and said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Can you imagine what that might have been like? God saying, I can provide anything you want. I'll give you a blank check. I'll sign it. You just put the amount of money you want and it's all yours. No questions asked. No boundaries. Ask for anything and I will give it to you. And we recently had the opportunity for that about 3 or 4 weeks ago, didn't we? How many of you, despite the United Methodist Church saying we don't do lottery, got caught up in all of that and said, hey, if I got that winning ticket, I could write a check for whatever I wanted. All my problems would go away. I would not have a need. I could do whatever I wanted. My life could be whatever I wanted it to be. And many of you, allowed yourself that dream, that thought, that hope, and then you woke up the next day and maybe you counted your blessings that you didn't win. Because you see the people saying, well, you need to kind of take away everything you've ever done in your life and take it away because you don't want anybody to know who you are now. You want to make sure you get all this stuff because people come out of the woodwork and you hear about stories about all the folks who won the lottery and the devastation it caused in their life because their life was not their own anymore. You hear it from movie stars and stuff like, gee, I just wish I could just be a normal person again. Well, maybe Solomon somehow along the way had seen that, or who knows why he chose what he did. But I think we got a little clue as to why he chose his answer, as is some of the things he says before he gives that answer. He said in verse 6, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. So Solomon's beginning to look around and say, hey, it's not about me. Something's been happening that you've been doing. And then he continues, now, Lord my God, you have made your servant, meaning himself, king in place of my father David, but only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. There's times in our lives when something comes our way that is wonderful. Maybe you inherit some money, maybe you get a promotion, maybe something amazing happens in your life and you get so caught up in what that happens, what it means to you, that you lose your friends, that, the people that you were, working with, all of a sudden now you're the boss and you decide to take the power and you begin to realize it's all about you. Or when with our children at times, there's a great opportunity and they miss that opportunity because they focus on what it is for them rather than the big picture on the team or education or whatever. And that's the temptation that we have. But we find that Solomon begins to see himself in what we call the upper story. The upper story is God's big vision. That God has a plan from Genesis that's going to be culminated in Jesus Christ. It's going to continue in Revelation when eventually God reigns on earth with us, his children. And so Solomon, at his young age, is realizing, hey, I'm part of something bigger. It's not just all about me. Because then he says in verse 8, your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. See, the temptation is for Solomon to go with the lower story. Hey, you're asking me what I need? Well, give me everything. I want ultimate power. I want ultimate wealth. I want to live forever. But he wasn't tempted by that lower story of taking care of himself. No, he's looking at the people around him. He's looking where they have been and where they are now. This great people, this great nation that God has called and chosen to usher in a place where God could dwell with his people on earth. And this past week, reading this chapter has helped me to understand that This means something for the church today. It isn't just about me, or it isn't just about you. There's a bigger picture of what the church is about that we might miss. I almost missed it last week. I got a glimpse of it. After the 9:20 service, I was out after the service talking to some folks, and one of our members came up to me and pretty much demanded, "Do you know how great you have it here?" And it's like, "Well, good morning. How are you doing?" I wasn't quite sure what to say after that, and I said, "Sure, I'm blessed. It's a great church. I really enjoy being here." And then again, she asked it with the same vigor. "Do you know how good you've got it here at this church?" I said, "Yeah." Same answer. I just didn't quite know what else I needed to say. And then the conversation continued. And I realized she wasn't talking about me, but she was talking about our church because she's moved. And she spent the last 6 months trying to find a church that was welcoming and accepting and had passion, vision. She goes, and I couldn't find that kind of church. Do you know, this is the kind of church that we have here? And she talked about the way in which the church is loving and accepting and welcoming and all these wonderful things. And she says, that's why you, not meaning you, Barry Heidi, but you as Bel Air United Methodist Church. Going back to verse 6, I am a pastor among a great people, a servant. And God has been working, and I'm here. And so I wish you say at that point I figured out that principle, but I didn't. So after the 11 o'clock service, someone comes up to me, and she was just talking about the cantata, how amazing it was, how it just made her cry and cry and cry. And I knew she wasn't talking about, the terrible sound that was coming from our choir. She's talking about, as I heard and I sang and heard about Jesus' life and being born and all the things he would do, and began to think about what he did for me and how much he loves me, how he died for me, and how this church, or actually she says, how you helped me to come to faith in Jesus Christ. I found Jesus through you. And again, I'm trying to think, what did I do? I'm still not figuring this out. Takes a couple times before the baseball bat comes out, till God kind of helps me to understand that. And then she began to say, I said, well, it wasn't just about me. And she says, well, it was these programs, going through beginnings and going through Alpha and the people that were part of that and helping me to find faith in Jesus Christ. And the Vine has really just, she worships at the Vine and is active there, helped me to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. She was reminding me and reminding us of that we're part of that upper story. In how we live out every moment and experience of worship and life here in the church, how you welcome, how you disciple, how you pray, how you give, is all part of that lower story stuff that allows those two things to happen in the life of this church as multiplied, as we heard, through the pastoral ministries and so many other places. And so I think Solomon understood that he is a part of something much bigger, and he just happened to be the son that David chose to be king. He realized what was at stake for him as king of Israel. That is why I think Solomon said what he did in verse 9. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? Solomon essentially tells God, you're giving me this incredible privilege of serving you. But I may be the son of a king, but I'm a mere child in this nation. So please give me the wisdom to be just and righteous as king. I think back at so many times, especially that time in seminary where I'm supposed to be learning all this wisdom of the ages, kind of being distracted about the values of this world. And maybe you struggle with that too in your life at times.